Hey there, welcome to the Posit Data Science Hangout. I'm Libby Heron, and this is a recording of our weekly community call that happens every Thursday at 12 p.m. US Eastern Time. If you are not joining us live, you miss out on the amazing chat that's going on. So find the link in the description where you can add our call to your calendar and come hang out with the most supportive, friendly, and funny data community you'll ever experience. Can't wait to see you there. And with that, I would love to introduce our featured leader today, Pallas Horwitz. She's an analytics consultant and a professional development coach. Pallas, thank you so much for being here.
So excited to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, of course. And I I learned about Pallas through a mutual friend of ours, Mark. And Mark is not here today. Mark, if you're listening later, we miss you.
He
I think Mark,
actually
did he
he's
still
hiking
let you
right
know?
now, but he messaged me
Yeah.
and said to say hello to everyone and he wishes he was here.
Yeah, he's hiking the Grand Canyon, which is amazing. Well, Pallas, if you could introduce yourself for us, that would be great. A little bit about you and something you like to do outside of work for fun.
Okay. Well, I'm Pallas. I've been doing data things for about 13 years now. Spent half my career in the gaming industry and half my career in tech more generally. And I've definitely worked my way up, starting entry level and then growing into a lead and then manager and then director. And it's just interesting to see, how things have changed every 5 years. There's new trends, new tools. And outside of work, I'm a big movie buff. I like really old movies like 1930s, 1920s. And all that stuff's available on streaming now. YouTube's great for that stuff. So I watch a lot of old movies.
Oh, that's awesome. I think that we probably have some cinema files in our group as well. Um, well, I wanted to pop in the link one more time to questions, make sure that I've got it to share with everybody, and remind everybody that when you ask questions in Slido, you can also vote for other questions. So if you pop into Slido, look at the questions that everybody else has asked, upvote ones that sound interesting to you, and ask your own. But I get to start because we don't have any questions rolling in here yet. So, one of the questions that I had initially for Pallas when I first talked to her was like, hey, a lot of data science projects actually fail. And a lot of like analytics initiatives fail. It's something that as data scientists, I think we've all dealt with. And so, one thing I've struggled with when I'm writing my resume or I'm talking about my experiences, there's always this question of like, well, what impact did you have? And I'm thinking, oh, well, that project got canceled, or that project failed, or that whole initiative got canned. Is there a way you can think of to like some advice you could give for people on how to phrase or structure things or approach things in that situation?
Yeah, I think a lot of times when we think about impact, we think, therefore, the company made this decision. They launched this feature. They made this amount of money. And there's a broader definition of impact, actually. When we try something out from a data science perspective and it doesn't work, well, we actually just learned something new. We learned this data isn't predictive of this outcome. We learned this technique falls short. And sometimes the absence of something working saves the business time. It means we don't need to invest further there. It means we can ask other questions. We can focus on other hypotheses. And that in and of itself is valuable. You are moving the research of your company forward when you find out something doesn't work because it means, well, someone else doesn't need to do that. You've saved time. You're moving forward. And so I think, when we think about these research studies or these analysis techniques, it's not just about what answer did you get, but what do your business stakeholders care about, and how do you move the conversation forward? Our role as data people is to help business leaders make informed decisions with confidence. And so if our data can't inform the solution, well, that's okay. Then they can rely on their business intuition. And that's valuable for the business stakeholders to know. And so it's not a failure. It's still a learning. It's just a different flavor of learning.
As you're saying all this, I'm sitting here trying to think of things that I could have done differently or ways that I could have talked about all of these failures differently. And sometimes they were failures that were completely outside of the data product itself. They were failures on a leadership level or a strategic level, failures of communication, but I still learned from those. I think that's a great takeaway. All right. Well, I have another selfish question. Let me check Slido and see what we have here. Ah, we do have some questions in Slido. Okay, I will hold my selfish questions for a minute. We have an anonymous question that if you are in Slido, I will just highlight it so everybody can see it, but I'll copy it into the chat as well, which is what data project management framework have you found most success using? And I really like this because I've worked in all kinds of project management environments, and some of them I really don't like. So I'd love to know your opinion.
Oh, that's a hard one.
It is.
So the truth is, these projects are broken into phases. We need to understand the question. We need to decide on our technique. And then we actually need to do the analysis and iterate, et cetera. And um, I've worked on product development teams that use Agile. I've worked on teams that use Kanban, and none of these are actually a great fit for data projects because there is so much ambiguity. And so it's not that there is a best path here. It's about understanding how to chunk up your work and set expectations. Because if you know how to set expectations with your stakeholders, the actual project management framework itself is less important. The framework is there to drive decisions, drive timelines, drive prioritization. And for data projects, it's often better to have a conversation and then square peg round hole it into whatever company or whatever process your company is using. But I've never seen a process that like fits perfectly and seamlessly where you don't need to have that stakeholder conversation.
Yeah, nothing is perfect. I feel like it's tough because teams are made up of individuals, and individuals are,
Yeah,
are all completely different people. And often, when I'm saying like I've worked in project management styles that were really, really terrible, they were terrible for me, but they were not terrible for some other people on my teams, and that's always tricky, right? It's almost like
yeah.
teaching. Everyone's going to be a different type of learner. Um, One thing I also am curious about is something that I struggle with personally, advocating for taking the time to like sharpen your own axe. And we've talked about this on the Hangout before, but my question is instead of like, hey, how do I convince my manager that I need time to sharpen my axe? How do I convince myself that it is
Mm.
okay to say, I need several hours a week to skill build when that doesn't have a product at the end of it to hand over to somebody?
It's a little bit it's a little bit goes back to our conversation about failure. And it's only failure if you don't take into account the learning opportunity and the fact that you're moving the conversation forward. If you are hyper laser focused on, I have to figure out the root cause of what drove this metric, or I have to just project out, forecast whatever thing I'm forecasting, you're not thinking more holistically. And as AI becomes more and more popular, AI is able to, point to these different techniques and uh, methods.
Methodology?
That's the one.
There it is.
And what actually AI can't do, though, is add that, human je ne sais quoi. And, if we think about how can you be the best creative thinking human that is going to connect insights better than the people in the AI, models around you, investing in your skill set is going to make you better. And sometimes it's not just about getting explicit permission from your manager. Because if you want to spend 2 hours a week, your manager's not going to know what you're doing for 2 hours a week. You're going to be able to slide that in just fine. But it's about recognizing your impact doesn't come from just, spending more time in Python and R, typing at the keyboard, trying to fit this model. Your impact comes from your ability to think holistically, and you're not going to be able to think holistically without taking a step back and figuring out what do I need to invest in for myself so that it's invest in yourself for the sake of helping drive investment in your company. And you have to put your career first because no one else is going to do it for you.
Oof. That is true. And that is so, so hard to swallow. sometimes I really struggle with this. If anybody else does, I'm with you. We have another anonymous question in the chat that I really like. So I will highlight that for everybody in Slido so you can see it, and I'll put it in the chat here as well. Um, and it is, given all the different teams and all the different people that you've worked with, what repeated forms of communication failures have you seen, and how can you now overcome them preemptively?
Well,
That's a big
there's
one.
a
I'm
lot of
putting it in the
usage of
chat.
words like failure in these questions, and I
There
really
are,
try to
yeah.
move away from that mindset. Things are not so binary in terms of success and failure. But I'd say the constant throughout my career, regardless of whether I'm at a startup, if I'm working on slot machines, hair extensions, helping out Facebook in India, the common thing is people who are drawn to data careers think differently oftentimes than the business people around them. And that means they also communicate differently. They focus on different things. I've been called pedantic many times in my career. Sometimes I take that as a compliment, and sometimes, yeah, whatever, I brush it off. But I fixate on the details, and I'm paid to fixate on the details in ways that no one else around me is. And so the biggest theme in my career is we're talking past each other. The business stakeholders don't fully understand my skill set, my tool set, and what I can actually accomplish. And until I really took a step back and spent more time talking to my stakeholders, I didn't really understand what they were trying to accomplish. And so it's really about having that conversation. We all would love to just focus on coding and not have to worry about the human element. But the truth is, those human connections and those human relationships, understanding what matters to the people around you, that's actually what's going to help you drive your impact forward. That's how you're going to build trust. That's how, when your model doesn't produce the results you were hoping for, when you have that relationship and you have that trust and you have that understanding with your stakeholders, that's when they give you grace. And they're like, oh, you worked really hard. And now we know this methodology doesn't work out and you can try this other thing. But that doesn't work unless you talk to each other. And there's this art to understanding what are the questions my business stakeholders meant to ask, because sometimes they don't even know how to word their questions, because as I said, they don't understand our skill sets and our tool set most of the time. And so how do you learn how to translate what they meant to ask you for?
Yeah. That's a good one. My degrees, while they are statistical and mathy and stuff, come from a college of business, and so I got a bunch of business courses, and that was one of the biggest business analytics lessons for me in school. Was like over and over again, people are not going to know what they want. But it's the same education that my husband, who has an arts degree and worked in like marketing and branding and logo creation, it was the same thing. He was taught like no one's going to know what they want, and half the job is you helping them figure out what they actually want and then translating that into the stuff that you can give them. Fantastic advice. Thank you, Anonymous Asker, for your wonderful question. We have some non-anonymous questions popping up here. Um, but I want to follow up with an anonymous one again because it's right in line with what you just said. You said like, I just want to, stick to coding, and maybe that's not the best thing. This question is, as an R expert, R coding, programming language, I'm often encouraged to learn more about business context. Should coders go deep into domain knowledge or rather focus on building strong bridges with business experts? I feel I'd rather stick to what I do best and just code in R.
So, I mean, that's a hard one. This is a really personal choice. Thinking about what you should be doing is a bit of a trap because, I guess in the first 3 to 5 years of your career, you have to check a bunch of boxes, and it's about learning how to be effective and do effective analysis, find statistically significant results. And so you should be focusing on your hard skills those first 3 to 5 years. Um, from there, you when you play to your strengths, you're naturally going to be more inspired, more curious, and you're going to work harder than the people around you. And so if you focus on what you should pick up, well, all of the other people who are naturally inclined to that are going to do it better than you. And so if you force yourself, well, everyone says I should be doing this in Python, and then you force yourself, Well, the problem is the next generation is going to be doing that much faster than you, and they're going to work harder than you and get further ahead than you. And so it's not about what you should or shouldn't be doing, but it's about where do you see yourself in 5 to 10 years? When the next technological sea change occurs, what are you doing now to make your skill set and your career trajectory robust against the next technological change? You know, when I first started writing data pipelines, it was all in Bash and I was managing a Hadoop server and it was miserable. And I should have become an expert in Hadoop and Bash. And that skill set would serve me not at all today. It does help me have empathy for my data engineering partners, but if I had just invested several years in becoming really good at that, it wouldn't have helped me get to where I wanted to go. And so there isn't an easy answer here, but just recognize if you're only bringing one thing to the table, eventually the technology is going to move past that one thing. And so, how are you going to future proof yourself?
Awesome. And I wish that I had a better answer too, because I've really struggled with this for a really, really long time. The like, people are telling me I should do this, or I'm being really encouraged to do this, and it doesn't really feel doesn't come easy to me. And I'm thinking, oh, I just must have a willpower problem, or like I should be able to power through and do this thing. And it turns out no. What benefited me most was doing the thing that came more fluidly to me and more easy to me, and really prioritizing it. So thank you, anonymous question asker. That was great. And there's a sort of follow-up question that flows really nicely to this from Arsenis in Slido. And so I would love it if Arsenis could unmute and ask that for us. And I will highlight it in Slido so everybody can see it. Pop it in the chat.
Cool. Thank you, Libby. And
A
yeah, thanks for joining us. Is it Pallas? Um, thank you for joining us today and sharing your experience with us. So my question is, given all the ambiguity around data-related titles and role definitions, what are some of the ways that you think a data professional can best communicate their skills to the market so that they can actually land in a role that makes sense for them? So yeah, we'll just put.
Yeah. So, one thing you can do is if you just spend a lot of time on LinkedIn and if you can find people who are already in the roles that you want to have, how are they talking about themselves? If you can reach out, even if companies aren't hiring, if you can network with people who run teams who have the type of role you want to have, reach out to that person, especially if they're not hiring, because that means they aren't getting a lot of outreaches, and just see if they'll have a casual coffee chat with you. You can you can make a guess and blindly have a hypothesis about how you should market yourself, but the best way to test your hypothesis is talk to the people that you would sell your experience to and find out what lands the most with them. Let them tell you what they're looking for and what the market wants.
Yeah. That's where I always get the advice to talk about your impact. We'll talk about the business impact you had. And I'm like, "Oh, on all these data projects that like went nowhere or failed or like an app that nobody used." It's always so tough. Okay. Arsenis, thank you so much for your question. Um, I have the same question over and over again, and it's always a struggle. I had a question from Rachel that I wanted to let her talk about. Rachel, do you want to ask that one?
Yeah, Pallas, when you were talking about helping people translate their ideas into a language that resonates with stakeholders, I was wondering if you could give us a specific example or one that like comes to mind for you right away.
Yes, just give me a moment to think of one.
Okay.
um, I think a common theme is stakeholder asks for dashboards. I want to be able to slice this dashboard by date, country, blah, 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 like 10 to 15 micromanage slices the data. And whenever I get those sort of requests, my initial thinking is, yeah, you don't know what you're actually looking for. You just want to ask for everything, just assuming if I work for a week or two putting together every different slice of this dashboard, you'll finally have that magic aha moment, but you don't actually know what you want. And so whenever I get a very detailed ask that has like 10 to 15 different subsegments in it, that tells me, let me go have a conversation with that person. What are you trying to accomplish with this? What are you going to do with this data? What are you going to do if the data is informative and it validates your hypothesis? What are you going to do if the data negates your hypothesis? What are you going to do if the data is muddy? And then I check to see, do I get different answers? Because if the stakeholder tells me, well, if the data is positive, I'm going to do X. And if the data is negative, I'm going to do X. And if the data is blurry, I'm going to do X. Well, now we no longer have a data-driven decision. This stakeholder already knows what they want to do. And so understand why they want to do it that way. And then think about what are the pitfalls. Well, the problem is they're not thinking about this long-term holdout. And this idea they have, they're not taking into account all of the users that aren't going to have access to that feature. So instead of just providing them a dashboard of all the 10 to 15 different cuts, I'm going to also provide them information on how things are performing over and above the holdout so they can actually see what level of incremental value they're driving. They didn't ask for the incremental value functionality. They didn't ask for the holdout visibility, but that's going to actually tell them if they're on track to accomplish their goals. And so, you have to understand what they want to accomplish, and then you have to use your own statistical knowledge to figure out, based on what's in my toolkit, what can I easily provide them that will actually answer their questions.
Thank you. Do you ever see it like going the other way as well, where a data scientist has a really great idea for something, but they have to convince stakeholders that this is something they should pursue and like then putting it in their stakeholder language?
That happens all the time, because sometimes the things we want to pursue, in order to explain them, we have to go into a level of mathiness that no one actually wants to listen to, and that's hard. Um, it's pretty common for the first time I pitch ideas for them to be rejected. And I often think of, in a business context, when someone tells me no, that means that this idea is not yet a fit for where the business is. And so once I think about, okay, this idea is not yet ripe, what are the things that are holding the idea back? What do they care about right now? How can I turn a not yet into a yes? And that, again, you have to empathize with your audience and understand what they care about to get that no to a yes.
I like that. I also like thinking about like listening to stakeholders and the way that they are saying things and the words that they are using to describe them in all of your conversations. And then ask yourself if you are using the same language back to them or not. One thing that's always been challenging to me here is that the advice always seems to go towards the data scientist or the analyst or the data people to talk more like stakeholders, but the advice doesn't ever seem to go the other direction. Like, hey, business people, learn more data stuff, be more data literate, talk more like a data scientist. I would love to emphasize that it can go both ways. You can both sides can be more aware of how the other is talking. I also wanted to call in some stuff that's happening in the chat because it's been really, really great. We were talking about, the anonymous question of like, I'm encouraged to learn more about business context, but I just kind of want to code. Marlene had a great bit of advice there. Marlene, would you be willing to hop in and talk about the hiring market right now and how all that stuff is going?
Oh yeah. And I can go on. So, and I want Pallas to have her time because she's awesome. And
All
thank you.
right, quick minute from Marlene.
So I'll speak from personal experience. I was unemployed for almost a full year. Imagine trying to live on your savings and almost being ready to empty your retirement account after a year, because frankly, it's just hard to pay for things on unemployment. So I very quickly, I have like a lot of coding background, but I've also just been like a figure it out as I go person, and I will handle the task at hand, and whatever's on fire, I put it out, and that kind of deal. In the job market, I got several applications that ask specifically, how much experience do you have in healthcare? How much experience do you have in HR? How much experience do you have in this, right? And depending on what I was applying for, if I put less than 1 year, my resume went into the dumpster. Like I could just tell. I wasn't even getting responses back. If you are experiencing this, I feel for you. My heart goes out to you. It is not easy. Cry yourself to sleep, rock yourself, whatever you need to get through it. Call mental health lines if you need, phone a friend. But it is really rough. I highly suggest, um, I'm not saying lie, but I think it's worth going into an interview and saying, I know your company does this. I haven't done a lot in that, but here's what I've studied in just prepping for this interview. And I want you to know that I can learn the domain knowledge very quickly. But these are the tools that I have ready to go that's going to take your company to the next level. All that being said, I got to second round interviews doing that and it was great. But what got me the job was knowing somebody. So build your network. I love this Hangout for so many reasons. Thank you so much. Yeah, Ted and Marcos and all the folks that I've made friends with here, Rachel and Libby too. These are the folks that help you realize like there's a world outside of unemployment. So other than mental health, right? It's good to just know who's hiring and what, I think I pinged one other person on this call and said, hey, I'm interested in a job that's kind of in your field. Like, can we give me like the ups and downs of your field and whatnot? And even that was valuable because I realized very quickly I didn't want to go into that work. So build your
Oh,
network. That's what we're all here for. It takes a village. And there's my quick diatribe. Does that help, Libby?
yes, yeah, awesome. And that is really valuable, like finding out what you don't want. It could be super, super valuable. Um, because what you do want, you're looking at a really broad target. Like of all of these things, what do I want? But when you figure out what you don't want, it tends to be pretty specific and easy to avoid or steer clear of. Um, awesome. Thank
And
you
you
so
can say
much.
you want to code, but the truth is, an employer is going to hear, I have to hire somebody to do something manually that ChatGPT can do, unfortunately. So instead, you have to do the data science speak where I translate things more in like Pallas, like I can think about your greater needs and put it in data speak to feed to a ChatGPT model and or confer with other scientists. So I'll also tell you that you have to learn how to kind of speak that language a bit now, or else employers aren't going to hear it. They're just going to think you're going to be overpaid for a lot of extra work. It's
Well, speaking of like ways that our industry is sort of evolving, Rohan had a question about this very, very thing. So I would love it if Rohan could unmute and ask his.
Hello, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Great. Hi, Pallas. So my question is, given how quickly the data science field is evolving, do you have any best practices or tips on basically keeping up or staying ahead with the data science field?
So I'll be very honest. One of the reasons I went into management and leadership was because staying on top of the latest coding trends, it was something I should be doing, but it was not a natural strength of mine. Whereas understanding the needs of technical stakeholders and business stakeholders and connecting those dots, that was something that I knew I was particularly good at, and the people around me weren't. And so, if you think about the things that you do better naturally than everyone around you, and then you think about, well, how is AI gonna magnify that? How can I leverage AI and what's coming next to enhance my strengths? That's not a very like specific answer, but that's like a lot of what I do in my coaching practice is helping people understand their strengths and then figure out, how do you now future proof yourself and make sure that, when that next generation, because I'm a millennial, and so Gen Z came up and they were hungry, and next gen alpha is going to come up and they're going to be really hungry too. And so what are you going to do that's unique to you that no one else can be as you as well as you can? Like, you're the best at being you.
It's a lesson that we've been trying to teach ourselves since childhood, right? Like, be yourself, just be you, you're great. And yet, some of us, I mean, I'm almost 40 and I'm like, wow, it's taken me a really long time to embrace that lesson and realize that me as myself, I do have value. The things that I like to do have value. Yours, everybody, you do too. All right, Rohan, thank you so much for the question. let's move to Cecilia. And Cecilia cannot unmute, but she would like to know what drew you to coaching after such a strong technical and leadership career. I bet it just came along with the territory of leadership, huh?
I mean, the favorite part of my job was having one-on-ones with my team. And I was laid off 2 months ago on April 1st. And I had to think about, all right, well, the market's in a weird spot. What do I want to be? How do I want to be spending my time? Well, in my job, my favorite way to spend my time was having one-on-ones with my team. Wait a second. Coaching is just all one-on-ones. I'd have to figure out how to meet people and how to connect with people. But there are ways that I don't need to find a company to pay me to have one-on-ones with people. I can just talk to the people directly. And if I'm providing value, and they want to meet with me and I want to meet with them, we'll figure out how to make it work. And so, I'm only 2 months into my coaching career, but I'm really enjoying it so far. And I've had a lot of fascinating conversations. And I am seeking my next role. Coaching was just something that was going to help keep me busy while I was unemployed. And it's possible my coaching takes off and then full-time employment doesn't make sense. We're having a bit of a race condition here to see which happens first.
Yeah, I feel like the question of how long you've been coaching though is not like 2 months. If you're a leader, you've been coaching
Yeah.
people for years and years and years. The pay structure is just different because freelancing is difficult, as I will attest. Cecilia, thank you for your amazing question. I have another question here from Lolu. If you are able to unmute and ask, that would be great. If not, let me know in the chat and I can ask for you as well. And I will put your question here in the chat.
Sure, that's fine.
Hey.
Hey, hello. Yes, Daisy, I was just trying to pick your brain, trying to refine my approach when it comes to stakeholder management. Like when you're interacting with business stakeholders, is there any particular fundamental structure you use that you recommend during meetings? And what's usually like most crucial agreements or insights that you hope to take out of those meetings?
So the first thing I do, if I have a particularly difficult stakeholder that I'm not winning over, I'm going to ask them for a casual coffee chat. I want to get to know them interpersonally. I want to know what they do on the weekend. I want to hear about their pets. I want to see photos of their pets or their kids or whatever. I want to build a connection where they're going to give me the benefit of the doubt, because once they see me as a human, they're going to be more inclined to be patient with me, to listen to what I have to say, to not jump to conclusions. And I'm going to be doing the same for them because now I care about them as a human as well. And so I think the trap is to think of your stakeholders is just like barriers or obstacles or another subsystem or just like a technical component, and they're people. And it's rare for, especially for technical people, it's rare for a technical person to reach out to a business stakeholder and say, hey, I just like to get to know you better and about your career and how you got to your position. And when you actually show interest in people, the dynamics of the conversation changes. And then you're having a dialogue as opposed to people just shutting you down.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Lulu, I hope that that helped answer your question. I heartily agree. And I don't think I need to tell anybody that I'm a fan of making friends with everybody that you talk to. And um, instead of networking, just make friends. I also will say one thing that I find really helpful is just avoiding corpo speak. It helps people see you as an actual human being and not a corporate avatar of yourself. And so when you want people to, like Pallas said, like give you the benefit of the doubt, trust you, have real conversations with you, be patient with you, um, talking like a regular human being, like you're their neighbor, can be so helpful. Alrighty, I have a question from Zach, and it has an asterisk, so I will ask it for him. And that is, how do you expect the career landscape to change in the next few years? But Zach, I want to pin onto the end of this and say also, like, how have you seen the career landscape change? Because you've been in data for a really long time.
Yeah. I mean, when I started my career, and I know that this is going to make everyone on this call cringe a little bit, but I'm going to say it anyway. I did most of my work in Excel when I started my career. And then we moved to automation, and I learned SQL and I learned Python, and I'd used R a bit in college. And then I learned some machine learning techniques, and then it became Bayesian, and then it turned in more into deep learning. I was like, oh, that's wizardry. I'm not ready to learn. I'm gonna hire someone else to think about that stuff. But I've seen the sophistication grow and grow and grow. And now with AI coming, there's almost like this critical point where just being a tech, it used to be the more technical and the more statistical wizardry you knew, the easier it was to get a job. And now I think there's this pendulum swinging the other way, which is if you're just a technician, it gets harder unless you're one of those few that have the PhD that are working on the LLMs, helping OpenAI and Claude and ChatGPT and all of that stuff. If you're not in that niche domain, just being a technician probably isn't enough. And so, how are you expanding your impact in terms of maybe as a data scientist, you want to expand your impact, but you want it to be technical still. And so you want to demonstrate, well, I can do all of my data engineering as well as all of my data science, as well as all my analytics engineering and dashboarding, et cetera. And so you want to demonstrate that you have extra value because you don't have just the typical data science skill set. Maybe you're a technician, but you also want to learn how to do some software development as well, or you want to show that you can build apps with AI. How can you be more than just the person who writes models in R and Python? How can you be something plus that?
Yes, I like that. And I've got to say, no shame, no hate to Excel. We all still use it. And there's so much Excel like love and support in the chat right now. If you are listening or watching this later and you're like, oh, I use Excel.
I also love Excel.
So do we all. Yes. And Excel is, as several people have said in the chat, I think Excel is a gateway drug where you're like, Excel is fantastic until it's not, and then you need something more. And that's often how many of us end up coding or doing code first analytics, is because we needed that. So Zach, thank you so much for the question. I have a question from Kyle as well. Kyle, I don't know if you are available to ask this. I want to say I don't think that you are, but maybe, let me see.
Yeah, I can ask.
There he is. Yay. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. So I have a friend that works in the industry, and I know it's a sample of one, but when he's evaluating candidates, he looks at their GitHub profile. So how much does your GitHub profile weigh into job candidacy? And do you find it to be more important than other tangibles?
I don't have a GitHub profile. I'm just going to put that out there. I think it really depends on the role and the type of company you're interviewing with. There are companies where absolutely that's a non-negotiable. And you need to have that, and you need to have it's not just you need a profile, you need recent commits in a language that they care about, working on a problem that's similar to the problems they work on. And so this goes back to a question from earlier, which is, talk to the people that are in the roles you want to have, talk to the hiring managers, especially the ones that aren't currently hiring because they're not swamped with LinkedIn requests, but talk to the people who are managers at companies you want to work at, and they can tell you how important that is. Over my career, I've only had 2 roles where I actively checked the GitHub commits, and it was because it was a really niche problem I needed them to solve. And I needed to know that they had very, very relevant domain experience. But I haven't checked GitHub profiles for most of the roles I hire for. But that's not true everywhere. It really just depends on the actual industry itself and the type of company you want to work at.
Awesome. Thank you. And pulling in some stuff from the chat verbally, Marco says, we never decide to interview based on GitHub where he works, but we do look at it if you link it in your resume. So if you're going to link it, make sure that it's nice to look at or presentable. My own GitHub is an absolute mess. I use it for demonstrating things to people. And so I'm constantly just putting random stuff in there to help people practice. But I like the call out that like you don't have one. And I have never had a cohesive and beautiful GitHub portfolio either. I don't want people to think that you cannot survive without it. But it is nice being able to have something out there that you can talk with people about. Thank you, Kyle, for the great question. Let's see what else we've got and do a time check here because we've got about 15 minutes left. There is a question here from Inga. If you are available to ask that live, I would love it if you could unmute. There you are. Hey.
Hi, everyone. Hi, thanks, Pallas, for being here. My question is, I think something maybe we already have touched on, but so I'm relatively new to data science as sort of a professional pathway. So I'm still learning conventions and norms, and I often kind of struggle to figure out how to showcase skills and data-related achievements when the projects that I want to highlight are confidential. So just thoughts about strategies or suggestions for demonstrating expertise without violating confidentiality.
Yeah, that's hard. You can talk to the company where you're doing these projects and say, hey, I'd like to showcase my work. What if I scrub all the labels, scrub all of the identifying context? Is there a genericized version of this you'd be comfortable with me showcasing? They're going to say yes or no. And then they're going to nitpick with you over, how much you need to mask the details of the analysis. And if they do say no, well, I bet that there's a hobby or a small business near you where you could apply a similar technique to solve a similar problem. And you can go in from the get-go saying, hey, I want to showcase my work. Or, do an analysis on, movies or sports or something like that. You can always do a pet project that repurposes the technique you used, but doesn't actually rely on their data. But usually the easiest route is figuring out what's the obfuscated version of what you did that the company would be comfortable with you going to the market with.
Thank you. And just as some sort of support for you, Morgana in the chat is saying yes. And I will say I've had the same struggle where I did data work that I absolutely could not talk about, totally under NDA, government stuff. A lot of people who work in government can't talk about what they do. I am right there with you. I will also say that it's totally valid to struggle while you're in the moment, while you are working on the project, to think about that. Oh, I need to find some way to document this for posterity for later. Because as you're in your job, doing your job, you're not actively thinking about the fact that later you're going to need a different job. So don't beat yourself up too much for that. But I will say I've been in that same struggle bus, and I've been in interviews where they're like, can you tell me about a time when you did this? And I'm like, oh, wow, well, that was 5 years ago. And it was under total NDA. And I can't tell you anything, but I can tell you sort of this. And not having that code to share is such a struggle. So I hear you. Thank you so much for the great question. Sarah, I have a question from you. And Sarah, last time your Zoom name was different, so we couldn't find you. Hopefully we can find you this time to unmute and ask your question.
Yes, thank you, Livy. Appreciate it. So my question is, do you have any advice for maintaining stakeholder engagement for in-house data science requests or projects before they turn to an external vendor product? In a fast-paced world, which there's lots of pressure to show excellent results quickly, this can be challenging.
Yeah. That's a double-edged sword, actually, because depending on the speed they want to move at and the stakes of the decision, you could intercept the train, but you might not like the consequences of doing so. When they're making decisions potentially to evaluate, putting you on a project or going with an external vendor or third-party solution, have that conversation and find out what goes into this decision matrix. How are you evaluating how to make this decision? And then be honest, if I were to take it on, this is what I can bring to the table that going externally won't be able to accomplish. And this is why you should go with me instead. And also be honest with the trade-offs. But by the way, I haven't, I don't have experience in this particular domain, or I haven't done this specific way, or it will take me a bit longer. And then, be really honest, which is if you were the business stakeholder and you just heard the argument you made for why they should go with you, would you choose to go with you, or is there enough risk here that they really do need to go with an external solution? And, you know, obviously the context and the details really matter, but put yourself in the mindset of the business stakeholder and understand how are they going to make this decision, and is it really in their best interest to keep it internal versus going external?
Great points. Also, maybe think about the opportunity costs of them choosing you for maintaining it in-house, because if there's other things that the data science team could be doing that are much more valuable than that thing that they're potentially going to vendor out, it might be a hard sell for them. My 2 cents. I'm giving my 2 cents on everything Pallas. I'm so sorry. This is the Pallas
It's okay.
and Libby advice show today. Thank you, Sarah, so much for your question. We have a lighthearted question from Joseph, which this one popped up in the beginning and I missed it, which is, so what old movies should we be watching on YouTube tonight? Give us an old movie recommendation.
So there's like a 1930s version of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde that I just adore, because they do all of these different, they're very experimental with how they do the screens. They're a little bit racier with the implied romance. And it's just got that little bit of extra edge right before the studio system really comes in and puts a hamper on everything. And I don't actually remember the name of it outright, but if you just Google like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde movie from the 30s, that's my favorite one.
I feel like Rachel just put an IMDb in the chat that's 1931, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, and I'm looking at a clip right now that is priceless. All right, awesome. We're all going to go look that up. Alrighty. More questions in Slido. Thank you, Joseph, for that lighthearted one. I love those. Let me take a second and look at all of these fantastic questions, because we only have about 8 minutes left and I want to be able to get in a few more if we can.
Libby, I forgot how when we would collect the questions through Slack, we were also like starring to say like, oh, here's some to pull to the top. And you're doing
Yes.
this like magical thing of reading them while you're talking.
It's difficult. Actually, I wanted to let everybody know I'm getting some DMs that are asking me to ask questions. If you could put those questions in Slido, that would really help, because I'm trying to, like I said, I'm trying to captain the enterprise right now and do many, many things at one time. So keeping them in Slido really helps me out. Salmita, who always asks amazing questions, by the way, Salmita, question asking queen, has one with an asterisk, so I'm going to ask it for her. With the increase in vibe coding and LLMs writing code, do you think that explainability and interpretability in data science have risen in importance? So as data scientists, like, should data scientists be better decision makers than they are coders? Really interesting question.
I'd like to say the answer is an easy yes, but I'm hesitating and I'll explain why. I have been in situations where it's really hard to make the business decision and no one knows the right answer. And so they turn to the person who can produce the most sophisticated math. And so while I do think interpretability, explainability is really important, there is always going to be that one category of problems, and let's call it 20%, where no one knows the right answer. So they're going to defer to the person who can make the most complicated math and be a little intellectually intimidating. I don't think that's the way you can actually build your career, but I don't think that category of problem is going to go away. So I do think in general, explainability, interpretability is very important, but that one category I think is always going to exist, because when humans don't know, we don't like the unknown. And so that thing we understand the least that seems really confident, let's just go with that.
Yeah. My 2 cents on this one is that trust in AI is a very interesting topic, and it's something that's evolving and being studied a lot, but it's been studied also just as like trust in predictive models in general, outside of LLMs or before LLMs. And a lot of times when you look at the results of those studies, humans were trusting their own judgment more than a computer output of a prediction. And so having that human being in the loop is definitely I think, still really valuable to a lot of people individually when it comes down to them making a decision. So keep that in mind and use that as ammo when you're talking to other people. Alrighty. So I wanted to tuck a few more in. We only have about 5 minutes left. And there was a question from Nellie that I really, really liked. And I think that it's a great career advice type question that's fantastic for you. So, Nellie, if you are available to unmute and ask that, that would be fantastic. And if not, I can ask it for you.
Mic down. Okay. Can you all hear me?
Yes, thank
Okay.
you.
Cool. So my question was, how can I continue to be a leader and mentor in a space when I'm now sort of at the bottom? Like I used to mentor freshmen when I was in college. I used to coach synchronized swimming. So I had a lot of these leadership mentor opportunities, but now I'm in my first full-time job and it's in data, which is not my actual like degree. But I really enjoyed it and kind of did it during my coursework. But how can I continue to use those mentoring skills, even if I'm sort of like towards the bottom of the chain per se?
You actually have a really important accomplishment in this market, which means you have your first data job. And there are a whole bunch of people out there looking right now, and they have not gotten their first data job. And I bet they'd love advice about how you actually accomplished getting your first data job. How did you transition into this career? How did you get to a place of paycheck stability? That's really, really valuable. And so don't discount just what you've accomplished in the past 6 months to a year. There are a lot of people who are trying to accomplish those things and haven't figured it out yet.
Absolutely. Yes. And someone, George, said in the chat, you can mentor upwards too. Like there are people above you who need your perspective as a person who's lower on the chain, and it's really beneficial for them if they know what's good for them. And I will also say there's an episode of the Hangout from years ago with Namrata Shetty. I will put that in the chat right now, where she talks about mentoring. And she's like, I'm only a few years into my leadership journey, but I am mentoring because I'm further up the ladder than somebody. There's somebody underneath me on the rungs of the ladder, and I can help them. Maybe I can't help everybody, but it's still valuable. So go watch her Hangout as well. All right, a few minutes left. Can we tuck one more in? Nellie, that was a great question. I feel like I want to just ask a generic career advice question. We ask this of everybody. Like, what's the number one most memorable piece of career advice that you can leave us with after today, Pallas? Or just something that comes to mind that was really impactful for you personally.
Yeah.
We've drained you of so much advice already today.
The one that was told to me so I was in the gaming industry at the time making video games. I'm sure there are people on this call who work in healthcare, and this advice does not apply to you guys, but it applies to everyone who's not in healthcare, which is I had just done an analysis. The results were awful. The product was going to die. We were going to have to pull the plug. I felt so responsible that I produced the analysis that was going to kill the product. And a friend of mine told me, it's just an effing video game. No lives are at stake. And I think sometimes, we devote so much of our waking lives to our analysis and understanding the data that we forget to have perspective. And again, this is not for the healthcare people. This is for everyone else. Lives are not at stake. Sorry, healthcare people. Lives might be at stake for you guys.
I really appreciate that. And you know what? As I was asking you the question, like, what's one that made a really big impact on you? Mine is sort of the same. I had a manager say, Libby, there are no analytical emergencies. Like, you can chill out. It's okay. Because I'm very hard on myself. That's the feedback I get from managers. Like, Libby, you're so hard on yourself. Thank you so much, Pallas, for hanging out with us. This has been wonderful. I hope you've had a good time.
Thank you. No, this has been great. And it's a shame that I wasn't able to like read the chat as well and answer more questions, because this is how I love spending my day. This is why I've opened a coaching practice, because there's nothing I enjoy more than just like thinking about things, talking to people, and then helping them learn how to think and talk as well. So thank you so much for including me, and thank you all for all of your wonderful questions.
Yay,
Pallas,
I am so glad you're here.
I wanted to make sure we left 1 minute to talk a little bit about your coaching practice too, because I saw some of your posts on LinkedIn. I didn't know if there's anything else you want to share about that.
I just put her
No,
LinkedIn in the chat, everybody.
Yeah. I mean, I'm just getting started. Right now, I have some evening availability for folks. But yeah, I have a link to my calendar on there. By all means, sign up. We'll talk for 20, 30 minutes and talk about what are you looking for? Is this a great fit? What sort of structure do you need? I do a sliding pay scale for folks depending on where they're at their career. And sometimes it's a fit and sometimes it's not. But, I think I'm a friendly person. I'm not going to bite. Come chat with me and we'll see what makes sense.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Pallas. Everybody, if you would like to save the chat, there are 3 dots at the top of the chat box. You can click those and then click Save Chat. And you can take all the resources with you. Thank you for hanging out with us on this beautiful Thursday. And next week, I hope that you come hang out with us because we are going to have Kieran Healy and Jonathan McPherson, 2 of our keynote speakers for PositConf that are coming up. And if you know either of those guys, you know that it's going to be a really, really interesting discussion. So come hang out with us. Can't wait. Have a wonderful week. Thanks for being here.
Libby, you
Thank
just
you.
reminded me when you were talking about the conference chat next week. If anybody is thinking about coming in person and maybe like nervous about going alone or not knowing anybody, I was thinking next week's Hangout might be a good opportunity for people to just get to know each other a little bit better so you have a buddy when you're there in person. So if
Yeah.
you know someone who's thinking about going or not sure if they want to, maybe invite them to next week's Hangout too.
That's a great idea. All right. Fantastic. Thank you, everybody. I'll see you next week.
Bye.
Bye.